Good afternoon, everybody. Great to have you all here today. I hope you, your families, your colleagues, everybody is safe during these very uncertain times. Um, at MAGNiTT, we've been keeping extremely busy over the last couple of months, continuing to develop the platform, the solutions that we can help, and speaking to stakeholders. And today I'm particularly excited because it marks a first for us as a company as we continue to grow. Our mandate is to focus on data transparency, and through that, we're looking to expand by geography. And last week, we published the Pakistan report, which overviewed venture investments that have taken place over the last 5 years. And it marks the first country that we'll be embarking on to cover beyond the MENA region, with next week, the Turkish ecosystem going to be reviewed as well. And for us, we're still building our knowledge and understanding, and I'm really honored to have esteemed speakers join us today who are far more versed and educated in this space than I am. But one of the things that's extremely important to me is that I believe that data transparency and more information sharing can break down barriers in markets, whether it be investors looking to invest in value creation or opportunities across borders, or startups that are looking to scale, acquire talent or expertise in other markets. And the best way to be able to do that is to really break down some of those barriers. And part of our mandate as we build the platform is to enable decision makers to do that. Looking specifically at Pakistan, while the H1 report, so let's be clear, that's January to June, highlighted a drop in investments and number of deals, what we already know is that in the months of July, August, and even September, there has been a pickup in activity. And I think we're confident to see that the Pakistani ecosystem, with its increased interest and activity from investors, the likes of everybody who's joined us here today, that this year will surpass that of last year. But really for me today is to learn from the industry experts. And in terms of speakers today, we have 4 leading investors from the Pakistani ecosystem, starting with Rabil Warayich, who is the founder of Samaya Car. We have Ali Mukhtar, who is the founder of Fatima Gobi Ventures, Mina Tarek, who is a partner at Caravan, and Atif Awan, who is the founder of Indus Valley Capital. The idea today is to spend 30 minutes between us doing a little bit of a Q&A where I can ask some of the questions that we believe are interesting, hopefully for all of you, to have an engaged debate. So I've told all of them I like engaged debate. So if they have differing views, differing opinions, I welcome for them to share. But ultimately at the end, after about 30 minutes, I'm going to open up to the audience for questions. So if you do have questions, please do share them. Please put them in the Q&A box, and I'll look to try and get to each of them before the end of the hour. So just to start off with, I mean, a very simple one. Let's start with Rabil, please. Having seen the report and as an active investor in this space, I mean, what were 1 or 2 of the key insights that you may have already seen or were surprising coming out of the report? And did you expect H1 2020 to look like it is in the report itself?
Thank you for having us here, Philip. Just a couple of points on the report. First thing that was encouraging was to see that there was some activity even in the first half of the year, when it could have been expected that due to COVID, particularly in a jurisdiction like Pakistan, which is considered by many to be even higher risk than MENA and some of the other ecosystems, that activity did continue to an extent. And like you pointed out, it's only likely to increase in the second half. But what was also apparent was also the lag that Pakistan has, and in terms of the actual quantum of capital that is going into Pakistan, of only $10 million across 17 deals is actually fairly low. And I think that is maybe perhaps representative of a couple of things. One is it still highlights the opportunity in Pakistan for early stage investors to potentially participate, but also in terms of how limited capital can go a long way, or at least a longer way in Pakistan compared to some of the other ecosystems. This can be, again, like, partly due to cheap labor, the unit economics being maybe even more attractive at a very kind of like, low level, but given the cost dynamic is also a little bit lower, it does represent that opportunity in Pakistan fairly well. And I think it was very well captured by the report. So I think that's something that I took away from the report. And thank you for putting together what is the first of its kind data collection on the market. So very helpful from our perspective.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Atif, just to jump to you quickly, I mean, I, even observing it from Dubai, saw leading into 2020, there was a lot of momentum, a lot of interest. There were some events, there was some startup grinds, conferences. So there was this renewed interest of activity. Ultimately, where was this interest coming from? Is it new? Is it newfound? Is it just government-led or private-led? And given the crisis that we've seen this year, where are the opportunities that you think that COVID can leverage, or the ecosystem can leverage to come out stronger off the back of the interest that came last year and at the end of this year?
Yeah, so the ecosystem in Pakistan, it is still very nascent, right? And what happened in Pakistan is that the country lost a decade and a half between 2002 and 2017 because of security situation. That started changing around 2017. 2018 was a big year. You had a couple of good exits in Daraz, and there was a deal with Easy Pasa valuing them at 400 million. And then, Kareem's big exit in 2019, obviously also having a huge Pakistani component, the first lines of code having been written in Pakistan, a large part of the team being in Pakistan and it being one of their largest markets. So I think there were a bunch of those external events that had people pay attention to the ecosystem. And surprisingly, I think one of the things that jumps out of the report is that the MENA VCs are still lagging. I feel like Pakistan is sort of like on the radar on the side, but because the mandates are decided on an annual basis, so they're lagging. But what did happen is that talent started moving from multinationals or doing startups abroad to doing startups in Pakistan. So you had somebody like Usman Gul coming back, pairing with some local founders, starting Airleft. And that company grew incredibly. And that shows you the size of Pakistani market. It's the fifth largest country in the world. Its consumer spending is actually larger than UAE's and Egypt's. So when you actually build a service, it grows very fast. And I think like that fast scale attracted investors' attention, in particular, first round capital, which is a Silicon Valley based investor who is a tier one firm, having been the first investor into Uber and Square. Them investing in Airleft was a big splash. And I think it was a huge validation of the market and the potential, particularly so because first round capital had not invested in Asia for over a decade. And then since then, you had Village Global, Pioneer Fund, Quiet Capital, Naspers, Y Combinator invest in Pakistan. And I feel like that's forcing also a lot of momentum. And now I'm seeing a lot more interest from the MENA VCs as well.
Awesome. And so Mina, leveraging or picking up on that kind of point, what do you think needs to happen to see more investors, both locally, which is trying to get the FOMO effect? I mean, if we look at MENA, thanks to the large exits that we saw, the FOMO kicks in and family offices and private investors start investing, but also international, whether it's regional or from abroad. What do you think needs to happen, or what's the catalyst to driving more investment capital coming into the Pakistani ecosystem?
I think part of it is just
sorry, that was for Mina.
I believe.
Sorry, Atif, that was for
sorry,
Mina,
go ahead.
But she's on mute.
Go ahead, Mina.
Sorry. Yeah. So I was going to say, we can learn by what has happened in the last year, right? Towards the end of the year, what happened? What was the change that actually started to make a lot of people outside of Pakistan sit up and take notice? So there's two things that need to happen. A, the pipeline still needs to be strengthened a lot more. The deal pipeline right now is getting better. Literally, I think month after month, things are getting better. Like Atif said, there's a flow of human resource, good people that are coming into entrepreneurship. All of that is making a lot of difference. And B, visibility. For people outside of Pakistan to invest within Pakistan, this transparency or visibility that is just now coming about, I think has been a critical component of this wave of change that we're seeing and will continue to be a critical component. So and for that, I honestly, I think I give a lot of credit to Ali, to Rabil, to Atif, to all of these people who have been, who decided to be investors in Pakistan and decided to open up their networks and to go out and to sell the Pakistan story and to talk to other investors and start to get their attention. I genuinely feel that that's made a lot of difference, and it will continue to make the difference. And that's what we found even with our portfolio companies. I mean, even right now in Pakistan, if you have to raise a substantial round, you pretty much have to get every single VC in Pakistan in on the deal, because the amount of capital right now in our ecosystem is still pretty low, right? And so if you cannot do that, and that's not possible because everybody has their own allocations and their own thesis, you then have to get the people who are interested and invested in you to open up their networks and help you raise. And I think that's what everybody here on the panel today has done for their portfolio companies and will have to continue to do if we have to get international interest.
That's fascinating, because for me, it resonates with a lot of what we saw when I started MAGNiTT 5-6 years ago in the Middle East. I mean, there were only about 4 or 5 venture capital companies. Everybody had to speak to the same entities. And then with time, with transparency, with competition, with success stories, we began to see a little bit more. Ali, if I can come on to you, I think it's always interesting. We don't have founders on this session, and I'm sure we'll do a session with founders in the future. One of the things that is always interesting to me, and one of the challenges you see from MENA VCs, is that they want to see strong founding teams, they want to see scalability, and in many cases, bureaucracy can be a big challenge to the growth of a startup. When you look at the Pakistani ecosystem, and when you're speaking with founders, what are the top 3 challenges that they are facing when trying to build their companies and attract venture investments from a founder's perspective? And I guess kind of to complement that as an investor, what are the key triggers that you look for when you're looking for investments in Pakistan?
Okay. So overall, I think given where Pakistan is, size is definitely not a challenge in terms of even being a single market startup. I think, city of Karachi, 20 million people, Lahore, another 12 million people, and then
that may have cut off.
even within, if you don't take the country GDP, but take the, hello?
Yeah, you're back.
Hello? Yeah, okay. So yeah, within each cities, I think the GDP is high, and at those levels where affordability and scale for startups is not a challenge. I think the challenge is, and I think that also comes when we are investing into startups, is the follow-on funding, and how do you sort of test the founders up front on whether they have the strong ability to raise capital. So that, as well as the execution from the founder team, execution risk. But I don't think size is a challenge. I think you talked about regulations. That too in Pakistan, I think where the industry is, a lot of support by regulators such as State Bank, SECP, even the tax authorities. So when you're building out new verticals, I think in most jurisdictions, usually the lawmakers are reactive rather than proactive and facilitating. So as more and more companies are coming and testing different areas, we have seen the lawmakers also helpful and supportive. And everyone on this panel has been working with them to address some of those challenges as well.
Thanks. So I want to just talk a little bit to each of you individually about cross-pollination. So Rabil, I mean, I've met you at a bunch of events in MENA, and I think we've continued to see you come, and as you mentioned, you're already here in Dubai. But as you noted, relative to, for instance, Turkey, where there have been multiple examples of investors investing in Turkish-based startups, there's been a few in Pakistani-based startups, and even vice versa. I assume with the lack of capital in Pakistan, they're focused in Pakistan as opposed to trying to invest in MENA-based startups. Where's the opportunity there? What do you see as the opportunity, and what would you like MENA kind of investors or the community, both from a founder's perspective who are looking to try and scale, and those that are potentially interested from an investment perspective, what's the opportunity that they should be aware of to see more cross-pollination?
Sure, and that's a very good question, but I do want to lay a little bit of kind of like, ground for my response, and this builds on Ali's response earlier. The challenges, there are two key challenges that we still continue to see in the market. One is the follow-on investment, and that's where I will link it to where the opportunity is as well. And the second is also talent. We have spoken a lot about Pakistan being actually full of talent. I think I would describe it as a lot of resource, which needs honing and needs guidance to really be classified as talent. But when you're really pushing the edges and you have the likes of like IKEA, Airlift, etc., and they're looking for that top talent, it is now coming to a stage where it's being more and more difficult, because you need more of that diaspora Pakistanis to make that decision and become Pakistanis. And that's where I think the mobilization abroad is also happening, because some of those people are not really equipped to kind of like shut up their shop and move back to Pakistan, but they want to play a role. So in some cases, they are themselves either committing to funds or committing directly to investments, to direct investments, or in other cases, they are helping build this network effect of investors that then have, again, them rooting for that Pakistani ecosystem. And given that this is a relationship business, it's based on trust, it just helps build some of that bridge, which all of us on this call are also trying to do. And I think effectively that is providing access to that market in a form that was previously not available. And this does not only result from an investment into our fund, it is also in the form of a co-investment. So for example, when we are already invested in a company and it provides some trust, some feet and eyes and ears on the ground, it does lend a little bit more comfort to that situation, even if it is not something which is routed directly through our fund. To give an example, in a day or two, you will hear of one of the first Series Bs in Pakistan, a large, major investor in the world, arguably one of the largest investors in the world, would be leading their first investment in Pakistan. Now, this I take as representative of the overall ecosystem approaching the Series Bs. And really, that's where we are. We can't kind of like, really think about it being much beyond that. But what you do have is a lot more people that are now seeding those companies at an earlier stage. Just today, we met a few angels that have backed pre-seed, seed stage situations in Pakistan. And now they're speaking to us because they are also wanting to see some of their later stage situations. What they also do is once they invest in them, then they go out and create their own network, which then provides further avenues for that follow-on capital, etc. So I think primarily, initially, it will be through an investment focus that investors abroad can start to access it, and this includes institutional investors as well, including the funds in MENA. The second avenue is really the talent arbitrage that is available, and the examples of Kareem that had their team based out of Pakistan, but then straddled a few different markets in the region. I think we're going to see more and more of that happen because, again, Pakistan does have this talent advantage compared to MENA. And while it is one homogeneous market compared to some of the GCC ones, it is ultimately not restricting any company that is present in Pakistan, or for that matter, present in MENA right now that wants to expand into Pakistan, to now start exploring that. And again, 2 years ago, we were not having these conversations, but in the next couple of weeks, you'll also hear of a deal of that nature, which one of the largest platforms in MENA wanting to establish a footprint in Pakistan and then going with some localized investors, but also already having behind them some of the larger investors in the region and globally. So more and more of such situations happening means there's more confidence being built in investors. And once they have done their first investment or second investment, we are expecting them to then get a little bit more kind of comfortable and flexible in terms of like, a far-reaching portfolio, which might be within Pakistan as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Ali, I'm going to jump to you because we're talking about MENA, but With Gobi, you have partners in Southeast Asia. One of the interesting things that we've seen in MENA is a growing interest from China, Southeast Asia in MENA, and specifically Africa. And you've seen companies like Gobi, MSA Capital, you've even seen some startups from Southeast Asia, WeGo and the likes coming. When you start looking at the data at Pakistan, there's even more interest from Southeast Asian investors in Pakistani-based companies. What's your take on the East side of the equation from Pakistan's interest in Pakistan?
Mm-hmm. So I think before even there was VCs, we had any of us, we had exits to China, and then so Daraz exited, and then obviously EasyPesa raising significant investment. And then overall, I think from a macro perspective with China-Pakistan economic corridor, in the first phase, which was more G2G, now transitioning to more, private businesses, still under the government. A lot more is happening in that space, and then Southeast Asia, which sort of is now seeing similar trends in Pakistan, which they've already seen in countries like Indonesia, in Vietnam. Similar dynamics now emerge in Pakistan, and then I think the first kind of bets they're making in Pakistan are more opportunistic to the ones they've already made in their home countries. So for example, if I've made a travel investment in Southeast Asia, let me try with the travel investment in Pakistan, right? And then that leads to, I've had great experience, and actually the company is growing, and the metrics are very similar to same stage company if that was in Indonesia. So is there more that you can show us that we'd like to invest in, right? And then funds like Gobi that have, I think, taken a bigger bet with us into doing the first fund, I think, into Pakistan. But this is our view is obviously to, within the next 2 years, do a much larger fund in Pakistan. So a lot of that is happening, but I think it will follow from MENA as well. Because if you look at Pakistan and you look at some of the important sectors, large investments have come into the telecom sector from MENA. Some of our major banks are still owned by, GCC investors. So I think that now early signs you're seeing
Ali, sorry, it's cutting.
From MENA into Pakistan, and also, where did you lose me? Sorry.
We were just talking about the flow from MENA and the telecom investment space at the corporate level.
Yeah. So in the telecom space as well as in the banking space, and many other sectors, MENA has also invested large amounts into Pakistan. And I think that is carrying over now to the startup space. I think overall, we were talking about this earlier, but overall, I think as I see it, 3G, 4G was only launched in Pakistan in 2014, right? And it takes time for that critical mass to be developed. And usually in all the markets we've seen, 5 to 7 years from 3G, 4G, you have a big boom in the VC ecosystem and startups. So now is the time when we're seeing that in Pakistan, and I think it will continue to grow. One thing we had not seen was, not anticipated, was such early strong response from US venture capital, right? Actually in a lot of, we have now 5 investments, 4 out of 5 have US funds, which we had not anticipated.
Which we haven't necessarily seen in MENA as much. So that's already one ahead of the MENA region. Atif, if I can come to you, just talking about specific industries. You see in most emerging markets that it's usually infrastructure pain points. So travel, logistics, that get solved for first. And interestingly, when we compared the industries in the MENA region, which is beginning to mature now, 60% of all investment is going into fintech with regards to number of deals, and it's leading the way. Whereas in both Turkey and Pakistan, fintech didn't even feature in the top 5. What is the kind of appetite for investments in terms of industries? And do you believe that COVID will change that mix? Or is it still so nascent and early in Pakistan that it'll remain in the same kind of industries that have the biggest pain points?
So infrastructure is a core part of our thesis. I believe that in most emerging markets, the governments have not done a good job of creating infrastructure. So it's left to private companies, and increasingly technology makes that happen much faster in a much more capital efficient way. So whether it's logistics, moving people around, moving goods around, what we saw with Kareem, with Airlift, by IKEA, Cheetah, like that's the first wave of startups that have changed how people move in Pakistan. But then it extends beyond that. So now you're seeing a lot of B2B startups. There is Bazaar, which we invested in. There is Tajir, Retail, or Dastagir. There are a few of those who are saying, look, this largest market in Pakistan, which is B2B retail, $160 billion, that's very inefficient with a lot of middlemen. Can we improve that? I think one by one, you'll see that in every single industry. In fintech will take a little bit longer, but you're starting to see that in healthcare. You're starting to see that in fitness as well, in education. There isn't a clear breakout that's emerged, but there are a couple dozen edtech startups in Pakistan that we've talked to. So one by one, all of these industries, I think they will get disrupted. The reason for fintech lagging is cash is still king. Pakistan's economy is cash driven. The credit card, debit card penetration remains very low. And regulators have also been slow to catch up because it's not been a pressing problem from that perspective. That said, the current government is making a big push to document these transactions. So there are newer laws passed that are incentivizing lower sales tax on credit card, debit card transactions because they're documented, for instance. So I think that would be a good impetus. But I do believe that you cannot just jump ahead and rather than solve the cash problem and have a bridge to actually a completely digital solution, you can't leapfrog that. So what's been happening is the few fintech startups in Pakistan, I think they build the API, they build the platforms, and there is no adoption. And I just don't think that will work. So somebody who cracks how to get cash into these wallets, into these digital services, I feel they'll start to build a large audience and then use that to leverage and get into the transition to purely digital.
Thank you, Atif. Yeah, sorry, Rabil.
Philip, I just wanted to add to that. I think very good points raised by Atif. I think the core thesis that at least our fund had was not that Pakistan was going to become a tech hub for innovative breakthroughs for the world. It's really this $250 billion of consumption spending is now naturally moving to digital sources. And in order to enable that, as Atif pointed out, you need digital payments, you need infrastructure, logistics, etc. And each one of them is creating opportunities within its space. And even while we say it's a primarily cash economy, there are now opportunities to even digitize that cash. So for example, by IKEA Cash is a cash to digital offer. Now, once you go into that, then and you look at various different fintechs, you are seeing some of the underlying traction. One of the companies that we're invested in is on track to do over 1 million transactions this month. This month, 1 million plus transactions. Now, as far as this trajectory goes, we've seen this change in the last 2-3 years, not only because of the tech capacity enhancing in Pakistan, which means broadband penetration and smartphone penetration, but also tech adoption. And what COVID has done has it accelerated that because people like myself who were not previously ordering groceries online are now ordering them online. And it is, again, a move of that consumption pattern. So I think it's a matter of time that even in spaces like EdTech, which we think is going to be very interesting, but doesn't yet present the wide array of opportunities we would want to back. But I think many of these segments are going to see emergence of startups with traction, making sense of the unit economics that are on offer in Pakistan. And as long as they have scalable opportunities, the regulation, the authorities, etc., they're going to hopefully act as enablers. And we're seeing some of that move very, very quickly. In fact, every other week, we're now seeing the state bank come out with changes, for example, as simple as making it easier for startups to pay for Google and Facebook services, which previously they were relying on the credit cards for, to very soon also being able to incorporate holdcos abroad without having to go through laborious permission-seeking processes in Pakistan. All of this ultimately is moving towards that ease of business. It's providing more comfort to investors. And as more risk capital flows towards these sectors or these pockets of opportunity, we're going to see people start cracking these. Once there is an opportunity and that sees traction, you're going to see competitors emerge. So I think it's really more a function of time, but the direction of travel is certainly the right one. And I think COVID has accelerated that pace.
Thank you. Last question to Mina before we go into the Q&A. So if anybody has any Q&A, please share. I mean, an interesting point, I want to talk to you about the role of government. But interestingly, to the 2 points that were being made by Rabil and Atif, if you look at Saudi Arabia, for instance, if you imagined cash was definitely king in Saudi Arabia for a long period of time. And His Excellency Yasser Rumayyan came out and said it was thanks to digital adoption and apps that they were able to survive, to a certain extent, the COVID exercise, because you had the ability for people to deliver home, whether it's groceries and food. During the midst of COVID, they came out and banned cash on delivery. And the adoption of technology went through the roof because they needed to do paperless payments. So the question, long-winded way of asking the question, Mina, I mean, to a certain extent, to date, what has the government's role been in supporting the VC and entrepreneurship ecosystem? What more could be done? And if there was one ask from the government currently that they could be focused on, what would it be to really help grow the infrastructure for entrepreneurs in Pakistan?
Thank you, Philip. So I'm actually going to bounce this question to Rabil and Ali, because I know that they've been working a lot on this. They created a venture capital association as well, and they've been lobbying really hard with the government. So, I mean, up until a few years, up until maybe even a year ago, VC was on nobody's radar, really, right? I mean, maybe 3 years ago, there were more angels than anything else, the first wave of angels, and venture capital was barely anywhere to be found. And I guess Pakistan had much more pressing issues than for the government to be imagining that this was coming a year down the line or 2 years down the line and for them to be working on. So this is very new to most of the organizations at the government level that we have been dealing with. Then again, I'm going to let Rabil answer the second half of your question, because I know he has very exact points that he can put out that we've been working on with the Venture Capital Association, etc. But that's why I cut them a lot of slack. However, what we've seen is in the last 6 months to about a year, they've actually been very, very upfront about what they don't understand and open to criticism, a lot of criticism that we've been giving to them in heaps and spades. And they've been trying really, really, I think, hard to at least listen to us. Again, there are a lot of issues pertaining, our money laundering sort of situations that they're really scared of. Because of some of these issues. I think they're reluctant to make drastic changes, but that's not to say they're not open to it. So, Rabil, do you want to take this one?
Sure. And I think the main point is what Mina raised, which is there is appreciation both at the government and at the regulatory levels that this needs to be enabled, but will be primarily based on input from industry. That's an important kind of distinguisher in Pakistan, because normally, historically, you have people sitting in positions making decisions when they don't have any knowledge of what they're looking at. So that was the first kind of step. And then what they've done is they've created actually different various streams to address what are these underlying considerations, and they're trying to solve for them while keeping in mind the ground reality. And I think we appreciate, like everyone on this call will appreciate, that it's not as simple as flicking a switch on. And I think, at least from our perspective, if I may speak on behalf of Samayakar, I think there's been great response from like the regulators in the last year and a half to this increased activity that they've seen. Mind you, it also makes them look good if they do it. And I think that's what the government is also aligning with. Like, you know, if there are international investors coming in, if there are jobs being created for the youth, if technology as a scalable sector is getting traction, all of this also makes them look good. But now they finally have people that can provide some input. And together, I think we are going to start solving some of these problems that have been outstanding for a long time.
I mean, Atif, can I just ask a very simple question, which I'm naive and don't really understand? When you look at the Middle East and we speak to governments, you've got Dubai, Abu Dhabi, you've got Egypt, where it's Cairo, you've got Amman in Saudi, it's Riyadh and Jeddah. When we talk about Pakistan and a huge population, are there clusters? When we talk about government's input, is it clustered? Is there competition across regions and different areas? I mean, competition's healthy, or is it very much the capital where the startup hub is located when it comes to Pakistan?
Sure. So Pakistan is one of the few countries that has two mega cities. So Karachi is 15, 16 million, and unofficially, it's actually probably much larger, north of 20 million. Lahore is 11 million people. Both of those are the startup hubs in Pakistan. You know, they're very neck to neck. There's good talent in both places. Karachi is the larger market. That's where we are based. Now, from a government perspective, Pakistan has very simple government structures. You have the federal government, and then you have 4 provinces. Basically, State Bank and some of the fintech regulation that is more the jurisdiction of the federal government, right? So you're working with SECP, the State Bank of Pakistan, on those, and then the provincial governments, they own the healthcare, edtech, and the collection of sales tax. That's their responsibility. But at most, it's, you know, you're working with, you know, federal government representatives and the province you're active in. And within that, Punjab and Sindh, you know, they together are 75% of the country's population. So that's 3 governments that tend to lead, and then other provinces follow. So I don't think it's just very complex, right? So in MENA, you know, actually there's a lot of cross-border issues as well. And as a region, it's a bunch of small countries. In Pakistan, I think it's much simpler. And I think Meena and Rabiul made excellent points in terms of why that has lagged to date. You know, the government has bigger problems. This wasn't interesting enough. And now with the capital coming in and the government seeing that actually they can attract a lot of FDI through startups without having to do any work, as long as they have the right policies in place, the government is actually thinking about it a lot and making improvements already. And we're pretty optimistic about that.
Cool. So I'm going to go to all the questions here. Feel free to jump in if there's anyone that has a particular view. I think there's quite a few saying, how can founders from abroad or Pakistanis in the diaspora support the venture capital ecosystem in Pakistan? And how do they connect with talent or people in that space? I don't know who would like to answer that.
I can make one point first, and then happy to leave it to the others to cover. I think the first step is the Pakistanis in the diaspora need to help bridge this perception reality gap, which has affected the country for the decade and a half that Atif pointed out. Most of our luck in raising capital has been by bringing people to the country. And I think there can be no better champion of Pakistan than Pakistanis themselves, which unfortunately in the past have been like the people that say the most negative thing about Pakistan. And yes, while there are challenges, while they might have had better opportunities after going abroad, a lot of that has changed, and the pace of change in Pakistan is very rapid. So they need to be those extenders of that trust, that kind of like, you know, really not quantification, but like helping bridge this gap that existed and highlight to them the opportunity that exists in Pakistan. And I think from that point on, the moment one person dives in, all the friends, the network, etc., they immediately get additional comfort. And I think that will start the snowball effect, which can go a very long way in helping bridge more of the gaps.
Anything else that anybody else would like to jump on?
Yeah, so to answer your question about how they can get in touch, so I think I'm speaking for myself, but I think it's going to be true for everybody here. I get about 5 requests on LinkedIn every week from people diaspora, as well as just people outside of Pakistan who are now looking into Pakistan and are interested to know more. And these are people who want to come in as angel investors, who want to come in as LPs into funds, who want to come in with their expertise as mentors, as advisors. So for anybody who's interested, that's actually a very good way just to get in touch. At Caravan, we take a very, very collaborative approach. So everything, and I think I speak for everybody on the panel, everything we do, we're trying to do in service to the ecosystem. And so, like I said, there's still a, shortage of cash simply. There is a massive shortage still of good mentors and particularly technical experts. So if there's anybody like that who's out there who wants to either invest their time or their money for whatever reason of theirs, they can get in touch and we'll be happy to connect them to startups, to incubators and accelerators, to other VCs, to opportunities to help.
Question around international startups looking to set up in Pakistan. I mean, one of the things that we've seen here is that the competition that comes from abroad can help hire talent, which means that they can learn from more established companies from abroad. They can further drive competition with regards to pricing and improve product propositions. But setting up in Pakistan as someone who's explored it is not easy and it's not clear. Do you have any top tips for companies that may be thinking about this huge, massive market that we want to go into? Any hacks or suggestions that you could give to a founder that may be looking to explore expansion into Pakistan? I don't know, Ali, if you have any points that you would like to share, or anybody else?
I think as a first step, foreign holding, 100% foreign holding in many countries is actually not allowed. But in Pakistan, as a foreign entity, you don't need to have a local partner. That's not a restriction. So I think that's in itself a big advantage, where you have a free market where anyone can set up. I know the government has been trying to sort of create one window operations for setting up of companies, and I think they're benchmarking how long it takes to set up new companies. So those are some of the early things that the government is working on, and we expect that in the next but in terms of at the moment, to set up a company, what as a foreign investor or a foreign company, what your main initial stakeholders are the SECP and the State Bank of Pakistan. SECP, where you register a local company, and State Bank, where you register your foreign investment. And those are pretty straightforward processes that you can reach out to. SECP has been the most progressive it's ever been, and decades of doing business in Pakistan. They've been, and then so has the State Bank. So it's getting easier day by day. If there's anything specific, I'd be happy to go into that.
Any other hacks or tips for a founder that want to be exploring who to reach out to, or things to consider, at least from a legal framework? Any good legal lawyers? It's always useful to have lawyers. Are there any recommended lawyers, for instance, to reach out to if you wanted to help incorporating and navigating the bureaucracy?
Yeah, get in touch with Mubar Siddiqui.
Yeah.
I think he will.
Cool.
He will
If you
share.
if you could share his email address, that would be great, or his contact or LinkedIn, that would be great if somebody needs help with that.
Sure, I'll share it with everyone on the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, the most important thing. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think connecting to a local network is really important. So one way could be to get in touch with local programs. I mean, VCs, they might not be looking for investment, but they would definitely require local networks of some sort. So even incubators and accelerators could be able to help them, and especially making the connections to lawyers, etc.
Look, there's a couple of questions.
The most important thing.
Sorry.
I just want to add something quick. Is I was heading international at LinkedIn, and we entered a lot of markets, including Japan. And the most important thing is hire an excellent country manager who is from the country and grew up there. Like, they can solve a lot of these problems for you. I think for foreign companies entering Pakistan right now, their challenge would be like some of the best entrepreneurs. They are incentivized to do their own startups. So you're seeing that's why a lot of ex-Careem people are doing that. But if you can hire somebody really good, that makes everything else easier.
That's a great point. Are there recommended? I mean, is it better to go through obviously referrals, but headhunters, or is there any platforms? I mean, I guess LinkedIn. But given the size of your population, how do you find a good country manager that you can rely on if you're not familiar with the country?
So LinkedIn is great, but you know, you have to talk to people. So talk to ex-Careem people, talk to people who worked in Pakistan. Surprisingly, for a large country as Pakistan, the tech industry, like, it's very well connected. People know each other. We're very social. So I think just talking with people, you can find out some great talent.
I'm going to ask the question that's come up quite a few times. It seems to be a sensitive one, and I'll just read it as is, nuanced. Given that mostly Ivy League founders are getting funded, would you say this is a fad or a requirement by VCs to invest in with startups? And how can you foster local founders with local education as opposed to those that come from abroad? Does anyone want to have a stab at that? And my two cents is, by the way, if I may, not that I'm an expert in this field, we did our founders report back in 2017. When you looked at the UAE, which is not necessarily comparable to Pakistan, of 100 top funded startups in the Middle East, 45% had MBAs and 55% came from consulting or banking. And the logic being, given that they were the first movers in that place, many of whom were dealing with infrastructure, many of whom were dealing with bureaucratic and very difficult regulation, those are the people. But the new phase are many people that have been working for those organizations, as you've mentioned, the Careems and the Souks and the likes that have been invested. But sorry, to you guys locally.
Sure. My one view on this is that I think the venture ecosystem is partly reliant on learning from mistakes made before, and trying to utilize someone else's capital to have learned this particular lesson to be applied again. When you look at the Pakistani ecosystem, we haven't gone through a cycle. We are, in fact, at that very first stage. So if you are looking for people who have already done it, who have repeated the cycle, who have learned those lessons, it's difficult to find them within Pakistan. Yes, a person who has worked for 12 years at Telenor might be a good executive, but it does not make him necessarily a founder equipped to deal with the challenges of the venture ecosystem, to move at the pace that ecosystem requires, and to be able to engage with investors, raise capital, etc. So I think what is required to hone that local talent is to also have input from people who have done it. There's different ways of doing that. One is through structured funds like the people on this platform. Others is people who have done it before and are repeating it now. And even under each one of these new emergent startups that is reaching a certain level, there are 10, 15 new entrepreneurs getting created. And we've seen a recent wave of ex-Careem employees come out, and now having experienced that, even maybe one order removed, they now have the confidence and have some visibility of how to go about this. And I think that's really any ecosystem starting point. So while we have this advantage of having tremendous resource, a large number of engineering and computer science graduates coming out and coming into the market, what was needed for a long time was to make the notion of taking on entrepreneurship a viable career choice. That took these last few years, and now we're starting to see the effects of that. Once they start with their first venture and maybe fail the second time, they're just smarter about it. And I think it's really a function of that time that more people, by experimentation, complemented with some of these Pakistanis that are now helping them from their learning abroad, come and learn more. And also some of the local ones which are emerging, developing these businesses and getting traction and maybe exiting and then recycling some of that to help train the next layer of founders. So I think that's really, all of these things need to happen in parallel.
Sorry, what's a Pakistani? I keep seeing this, and I clearly don't know what the word is.
So the word Wapas means to come back, and Pakistani.
Okay, got it.
Pakistani,
see, now I'm learning.
Yeah,
now I can use that somewhere else.
Yeah, if I can just quickly weigh in on this, Philip, because this is something that we have internal discussions about all the time at Caravan. I think sometimes it's very important in whatever role you're in, whatever profession you're in, to recognize what biases you may have. And for us as VCs, I think we, a little while back, I think particularly last year when a lot of this activity was happening, we kind of took a step back and tried to understand what these patterns of investment said about the ecosystem and about us as VCs and about how we were evaluating deals. If I see somebody with an Ivy League with ideaandateam.com, and I think they're great, versus somebody who's very local, who's a survivor, who has been trying to do it for many years, does not have an Ivy League education, has not worked at XYZ company, et cetera, is not a pedigreed founder. We call them, pedigreed versus non-pedigreed founders. And if I, on a very basic level, have the tendency to gravitate towards the pedigreed founder, then I need to recognize my bias. And I need to make that decision. And I agree with what Rabil said to a very great extent, where we're seeing all of this talent come back to Pakistan, where, as VCs, our job is to mitigate risk. Our job is to find deals with asymmetric risk profiles where you have moderate to low risk and, moderate to high return portfolio profiles, right? And having that pedigree, having that job experience, having that Ivy League degree, being outside of Pakistan, having those experiences, to me, looks like it's mitigating my risk in the founder and in the startup that they'll create. So yeah, I think our local survivors have a lot of merit. They are survivors because they've been trying to do this since before I was a VC and before any of us were VCs in Pakistan. But B, yeah, they need to step up their game. And C, I think we need to recognize our bias as well and make very deliberate decisions, understanding why we're doing what we're doing.
Sure. Atif, I think you have your hand raised, which is a nice feature to use.
Yeah, so just a couple points. So Ivy League doesn't matter. The degree, like school doesn't teach you how to build a startup. So we don't care about that. The startup experience, having worked for a very fast growth rocket ship startup and having, learned those lessons that like Rabil Amina said, that's important. But in our view, the best teams are the ones that combine. So if you have a founder who's gotten, worked for maybe a startup abroad, spent some time there and, learned that, because Pakistan hasn't gone through that cycle, is combined with some local founders. I think that's a very strong combination, especially if you're building an operations heavy team. Actually, there is some amazing, incredible talent that, we've seen, that's never gone out of Pakistan, and that's not a condition. So I feel that combination of the founders and the early founding team where you can combine both, that's what we look for.
Look, I mean, my 2 cents, having done this now for 5 years here, is it takes time as well. Patience is a virtue, unfortunately. And with time, you get more people that have all of the skills and the attributes that you've mentioned, either having done it themselves or come from abroad. Now in the Middle East, you're seeing more people coming, especially in the crisis and especially given the situation that we're in, from abroad to use the opportunity now to come and set up in the region with the education and the learning that they have, because the opportunity cost is just a lot lower than it used to be able to do that. But that all comes with time and patience. Very conscious of time, I think there's an interesting question here, which is also very similar to the Middle East. Historically, overseas Pakistanis have been reluctant to invest in Pakistan due to a lack of security for investment. How is an investor, I'm assuming angel rather than fund, invested secured in a Pakistani company? Anyone want to take that one?
Yeah, one of the factors which is not very commonly known is that actually a lot of these startups have holding companies which are set up abroad, so are subject to different laws and regulations as well. In terms of our funds, I believe none of our funds are actually domiciled in Pakistan because the regime there around funds is not yet like in a position where we can kind of like, provide the kind of comfort that we will require and our investors require. So I think first point is that these structures, etc., are typically being set up in jurisdictions which are familiar with this and using blue chip approaches. Second thing is that a key call has to be made by, let's say, Pakistanis in the diaspora around investing in Pakistan and what their objective is. If they are going to choose to do one VC investment, that to begin with is probably something that we're going to discourage, because VC requires a portfolio. Now, if they don't have the time, capacity, or inclination to do that, then they should actually actively consider going by a fund, because that's why funds are there, to provide that diversification and to actually have fund managers who manage that kind of risk. So it is, of course, really about alignment of incentives between LPs, GPs, and founders, and essentially, that are all working towards a good outcome. And that good outcome should be the primary driver of incentives for the founder to not do anything short term, to cheat, for the fund manager to not result in leakage from the fund, and for hopefully LPs to then see that work being done in a professionalized manner, which previously was not the case in Pakistan. Like we've all spoken about, that the ecosystem was just not there. So the fact that all of this is moving to a more professional side is something which should encourage diaspora Pakistanis, that their involvement is not like, not being taken care of or looked at. I think that's been one of the challenges that they have. If they're sitting abroad, how do they monitor these investments? What if the person is a fraud, etc.? But I think that's exactly why we're here and have a role to do.
Anybody else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think just Rabil raised a very typically what we've seen is make first an angel investment, and that may not go well. Chances are that will not go well, and then as an investor, you sort of then lose out on multiple opportunities because your first investment didn't go well. So if you want to do direct investments, I think it's very important to then have a view and then make multiple investments rather than just a single investment. So that's a very important point as an investor, whether you go direct or through a fund.
Perfect. Look, I just have one last question which came through from someone before we end. When it comes to funding, would VCs, I'm assuming yourselves, invest in startups originated from Pakistan only, or are you open to MENA-based startups looking to expand into Pakistan? And if all of you would like to answer that one by one, that would be great for anybody that's on the call. Rabil?
Very much so. Like I mentioned earlier, our next deal is likely to be one which is a very large platform in MENA, expanding into Pakistan, and they want a local partner. And I think that just solves for what we're trying to build this bridge for as well. So very much open to it. There is a criteria that needs to be fulfilled, and needs to be there needs to be a Pakistan angle, but very open to these types of opportunities.
And maybe actually that's what I'll end with. If you can ask that question, and I give you the opportunity to share any specific things that you are looking for as investors for any founders on the call. So I don't know if you want to just explain your criteria, Rabil, as well, and then ask everybody else to share as well, so you have the opportunity.
Sure. So we've documented 4 criteria, 2 of which need to be met at the time of our investment. Either 50% or more of the co-founders are Pakistani, 50% or more of the workforce is in Pakistan, the company is incorporated in Pakistan, or Pakistan is one of the top 3 markets. If 2 of those 4 are fulfilled, it fulfills our criteria. That's not to say that if something fulfills only one of these criteria, we will absolutely not invest. It is really a consideration that if it's a temporary restriction and they might fulfill one of the criteria in a few months, we will still consider it.
Thank you. Meena?
Yeah. So for us, I mean, at the start of the year, we were considering a startup that was based outside of Pakistan, but was serving particularly Pakistan. So for now, we're focusing on Pakistan and the Pakistani market, or startups that are serving the Pakistani market. Our general criteria is we're actually very open. We look at whether the market is big enough, whether you're post-revenue or not, whether you have a strong team, etc. So it's a very basic criteria. We've already made 8 investments. We're looking to make 2 by the end of this year, hopefully. But yeah, serving Pakistan for now.
Thank you. Ali?
Yeah, so we have 3 investment themes, 3 key investment themes. One is obviously digitization of traditional industries. One is inclusion, which includes education, it includes finance, and it includes health. And then the third theme is common values, which is sort of our view that across the region you have 1 billion plus Muslims that are bound by a lot of common values, and then you can have a lot of different startups use that, and these markets are underserved in that capacity. For example, Sharia compliant fintech, or halal travel, or things like that. So that again is a big consideration. And then in terms of where we can invest, I think we evaluate if Pakistan either has a large tech team or has based here, or a large market. But in terms of founders, you don't necessarily have to be a Pakistani. You can be a founder that is non-Pakistani but wants to launch in Pakistan, and it is one of the strategic markets for the company. Then we can evaluate.
Thank you. And last but not least, Atif.
So our fund, Indus Valley Capital, is an early stage fund, which means we're typically the first check-in. We like to lead the pre-seed or seed round. You're focused on Pakistan, so Pakistani market, and then plus if you can expand to MENA and other regions, that's great. We basically look for some evidence of product market fit, so we can come in very early. When we invested in Airlift, they were doing 80 rides a day. They're just like in this. It had been less than a month. Same thing with Bazaar, they just launched their pilot. So we can come in very early, and then we partner with you and help you raise the next round, and we have the ability to follow on in Series A. Our initial check is around 400K to 800K range, and then we can do a 1 to 1.5 million in Series A. First follow on.
Look, it leaves me to thank all of you for your extremely informative insights. I'm really learning lots about the ecosystem. I'm very excited, I think, about the opportunities that you have. The more we can raise awareness of what's happening in Pakistan to MENA and vice versa, I believe that there'll be a lot more cross-pollination. Welcome your feedback always on the research that we're publishing, and please do share with us all of the announcements that you have, and we'll be sure to circulate that to the MENA region and beyond. We've already started aggregating the data for the end of year report to make sure that it's as comprehensive as possible. But it leaves me to thank you very much for your time and for your insights, and we look forward to doing this again at the beginning of next year. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Philip, and everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.